My name is Chris Briggs, and I've been serving with the Caribbean Christian Center for the Deaf in some fashion or another for nearly 2 decades. We have kind of a holistic ministry that works through education and teaching a language, because in the unique situation with the deaf population, where a lot of times we'll go to reach an unreached people group and then to learn their language and provide access to the gospel, many of the deaf are born into a cross culture within their own family. They do not share a language with their parents, often do not learn a language from their own family. And so before we can share the gospel, we go out to actually bring in students to give them a language and an education so that ultimately we can share the good news of Jesus Christ. So the picture to, I guess it would be to the right, is one of our classrooms where we're working with some new students. Frequently we don't end up with students coming in until they're 4, but there's also opportunity where we might not see students with any language or education as late as 8, 9, 10, 12 years old. And so children will come in and start with the basics so that we can share that. And then we have programs that will also treat trade skills or look for opportunities to provide development and to nurture spiritually, holistically, the individual with the deaf to create an understanding of the worth that God has created in them intrinsically. A lot of it comes down to education and awareness. I read an interesting quote that said, inexperience with or an ignorance of any community forms the basis or the bedrock of both obtrusive and unconscious bias or discrimination. And so it kind of makes this slide, which I put up with 72%, a little disheartening, because basically what that's saying is, this is in regards to the American hearing population. It's nearly 3/4 of the American hearing population will have little to no experience with the deaf community at all during their entire lives. And so we start off with that. When we get into developing nations or rural communities, we actually find that those numbers are exceedingly much higher, as far as 95% don't have that. And what that does is it forms a lot of wrong thought processes and fears. And we've seen that manifest itself in some really harsh, truly just hardcore discrimination. Things where we will watch simple things where it might just be financial or resources that are allocated for the development and the engagement of that group, to situations where there are abusive situations. We have found children who've been chained to trees with dishes of scraps for food like an animal. It's legal discrimination. Up until just a few years ago, it was actually illegal for a deaf person to have a driver's license in Jamaica simply because they could not hear. And then we see, some of the ultimate things of like even death, where there's murder. It was just a few years ago in Haiti where 3 deaf women were stoned as they walked home from work to drive the demons out of them. They were stoned to death. And so because of this lack of understanding, it forms this cultural bias against this group of people. But sometimes it's actually what I will call the unconscious discrimination, things that we're not even thinking about. As we watch, where you'll find work and employment discrimination. We have a community in Jamaica, it's estimated 75 to 90% is the unemployment, underemployment rate for the deaf, because no one wants to overcome that language or cultural barrier. Or in the opportunity that we will look and say there are 300 to 400 sign languages worldwide within these communities, and yet not a single one has a full scripture in their heart language. Only one of those even has the New Testament. And so that's not something that we're consciously looking and saying, well, we're not going to do it. It's an unconscious thing to where in the English language, we have access to hundreds of different translations, and yet because we're not aware of the need within these others, we watch that bias translate into an entire group of people who have no access to the gospel of Jesus Christ.
And could you say a bit, Chris, about the statistics of people who are deaf, and deaf being profoundly deaf, meaning they communicate entirely, primarily by sign language, access to the scriptures and being an unreached people group?
Sure. Well, I love the fact that the opening slides were talking about SIL, because Wycliffe and SIL have arguably stated that the deaf population worldwide constitutes the largest unreached people group on the planet. Statistics are always hard within the deaf community because they are dotted all over the place. There's not a single place that you can go and say, this is where the deaf are located. So the statistics, but from viable sources, we look at and we estimate it's between 1% and 3% of the world's population. So we're looking at somewhere between 70 and as high as 220 million people without that. If we look on that top end, we're talking something that would be equivalent to about the 5th largest nation on earth, and yet 99% of them unreached with the gospel. I think one of the things that has really struck me over the years as I've worked with the deaf is the power of perspective. Frequently, when we look at somebody who has deafness, we see a physical, call handicap. I really struggle with that word, but that's what it is. But many, if not most of the deaf that I've ever met or talked to through other resources will come out and say, you know what, we're not broken and we're not looking to be quote unquote fixed. Many of them have gone back and shared a verse which is very common throughout deaf ministry, which is from Exodus chapter 4, and God speaking to Moses, and he says, but who has made the mouth of man? Who has made him mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? And so the deaf will look at that and say, if God created Moses in a very specific way to serve him and to glorify him, isn't it equally just to say that God has created us to serve him and glorify him in the way that we're doing? The deaf community has a very rich, vibrant, and beautiful culture. It certainly shares certain aspects with its hearing counterparts, but it brings in many unique facets that are uniquely its own. As we've looked at that, that translates into their spiritual life as well. There are a number of times where I just will sit and chat with somebody who is deaf about what they are pulling from their relationship with God. Just a quick story about how sometimes that perspective will catch you off guard. It was a number of years ago, I was having a conversation with 2 deaf missionaries, and we'd been looking at a passage in Revelation, the picture of the throne room where every nation, tribe, and tongue are gathered to worship and celebrate the Lamb. And as we're talking about this and just the glorious opportunity it'll be, these 2 men, no joking aside, very solemn and everything, said, yes, won't it be truly amazing when we get to that point and every one of you will finally be able to sign?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, no, it's in English. But it's that perspective of when you look at it, when they envision that. And it's just those little kind of things that when you sit, there's times where you're challenged and you're like, I never considered it in that way. And so they just want to have a place at the table. They want to be heard. They want to be respected. They want to add what God has given them to add to the story.